Welcome to Monster Chats, presented by Monster VoIP, where we share the tools, methods, and best practices that business leaders use to build new connections, strengthen relationships, and impact sales in organizations of all shapes and sizes. If you have any questions that come up during today's episode, please text them to 424-378-6966. Please welcome the founder of Monster VoIP, your host, Colin Mitchell.
On today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Oleg Lougheed. Oleg and I are going to be talking about the path to resilience and the power of your story. I'm Colin Mitchell, the host of Monster Chats and the founder of Monster VoIP. At age 9, Oleg was relinquished from his parents' rights and entered a Russian orphanage. At 10 years old, he decided to be adopted into a new family, a new country, halfway across the world. To start a new life, at 24 years old, he began his journey of helping others live the life they have always dreamed of, despite their hardships and misfortunes, by allowing them to recognize the uniqueness and worth within their own story. Oleg, welcome to Monster Chats. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you so much for creating this space and that beautiful introduction to begin with.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited. I had the pleasure of listening to your TED Talk, and so I'm really excited to jump in and just kind of fill in some of the blanks there and learn a little bit more of the details. So let's jump in and tell me where it all started from, at age 9.
Well, that's a beautiful question that you ask. And the reason why is because oftentimes when it comes to our story, in my opinion, it's one of the hardest things to articulate. And the reason why is because in my mind, it's like a blockbuster Hollywood film that just has a beginning, middle, and end, right? Mm-hmm. And it all somehow flows freely, when in reality, some of the time that we bypass during those frames can be 5, 10, 15, 20 years in between each segment. For me, that story started in Russia. And the town that I was born in is called Chibarkul. And for those who are somewhat familiar with the geographic and the map and the landscape of that part of the world, it's in the direction of Kazakhstan. I envision it as a small city, when in reality, I think it's 1.5 million people. So it truly is not that small as I picture it. And the only reason why I think of it as a small city is because I remember being able to walk from one end to the other within 20 or 25 minutes, or at least that's what it appeared to me. My start in life was very interesting. And the reason why I say that is because for the first 3 to 4 years of my life, I lived under one roof with my mom and my sister. So when you talk about these things that are normal, I had those things. And then at about 3 to 4 to 5 years old, things changed drastically. My mom started to abuse alcohol even more than she did previously. And it put my sister in a very difficult position, where my sister actually had to become my legal guardian from that very young age. The question that I ponder to this date is that what she wanted to do in life? Did she want to become the mother or parent figure for her own brother? And I don't think there's any way of knowing that. And I don't even think there is a point of answering that question, because what's done is done. Mm-hmm. So from that point on, and the reason why I choose to focus on that beginning is I want the people of this show to understand the following. The circumstances you are born into do not have to determine your future. There's a choice that you can make, and how you process those circumstances and traumatic experiences makes all the difference. For me, it was a rocky start, without a doubt. I went through moments where I didn't know where I was going to sleep. I went through moments where I didn't know what I was going to eat. But I think having had that inner drive within me and that belief that no matter how difficult the obstacles may appear in front of me, that there's always a way as long as there's a will. That there's always a way to get through whatever the challenge may be in front of you, as long as you find ways to continue keep pushing forward. And so that first pivotal age that you mentioned in the intro as a 9-year-old kid was one of the first times that I had to face that decision, where I was able to see a slight vision of the future that was different from the past that I was born into. And that future was presented in the form of an orphanage. It was a system that I didn't know much about at the time, I'll be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I do remember that conversation I was having with, I think she was a social worker or some sort of position related to that. It was her, myself, and my sister all in one office. And I was asked the question of, do you want to go into that? Do you want to give up your parents' rights to go into that system? And I remember saying yes, without fully understanding the fact that I may not be able to see them as often as I wanted to for the years following that conversation. Going into that system, what I'll share with your listeners is this. As horrific as that place is seen around the world and portrayed throughout media, for me, it was a place of opportunity. And the reason why is because through the orphanage, I was able to find a hidden skill of mine. And it was the ability to folk sing. I don't know how I had it. I don't know who in my family had it that maybe passed that on to me. But I do remember that from the early days of when we were required to take some of these music lessons at the orphanage for half an hour to an hour, that I was just hooked. I gravitated from probably the first lesson and never looked back.
All right, so
that's where, go ahead.
Yeah, can we go back for 1 second here? So I just want to go back to the conversation with the social worker, with you and your sister at 9 years old, sitting there being asked that question. I mean, what a tough decision at that age. And how much thought did you give it before you said yes, not knowing what it, completely meant?
Well, I think one thing that helped in that particular moment is that I wasn't able to fully analyze that situation the way that I'm able to right now. So I think the way that I presented it in my mind was that this is a better decision than the life that I'm currently living in.
And was the life at home just so bad that pretty much anything at that point at 9 years old seemed like a better option?
To a degree, without a doubt, because for one thing, I felt like I was that rock between two islands, and the two islands being my sister and my mom. There was a lot of resentment between the two. And I don't blame either for having those feelings. Think about it. If your mom is no longer able to take care of you, and she passes that responsibility to an older sibling of yours, I can't imagine your sibling being thrilled to be in the position of a parent when they don't even know how to take care of themselves just yet.
And how old was your sister at the time?
18 years older. So it was an interesting life for her to accept, and the role that she had to play. And the other thing that I've wondered to this date is, did she want to have kids? What does it actually mean for her to have a child? What type of mother would she want to be? And if the answer is no, but you're also put in a position where it's your brother that you're going to say no to, did that create too much pressure for her not to say yes?
All right. So now you're in the orphanage and you find a love for music. Was that the first real sense of joy or happiness that you had experienced in quite some time?
I would say yes and no. And the reason why is because I think joy, along with many other emotions, it's like an onion. I think there are many layers to it. So I've experienced joy prior to it, but in very small elements. And that is just the brief conversations with my sister, the moments that I hugged my mom, the moments where I was able to see her sober. But music was interesting because it gave me something to look forward to on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing that helped me reframe and change my mindset, because I understood when those lessons were going to take place every week. And it almost gave me a set of milestones to look forward to every single day, versus when I was living the life prior to the orphanage, there were no milestones. You didn't know when certain things were going to come into your life. So your way of living was dealing with the uncertainty every single moment, every single minute of that day. Versus in the orphanage, you had an understanding that, hey, on Wednesday at 5 p.m., this happens. On Friday at 2 p.m., this happens. So there was a sense of consistency that ultimately allowed me to, I think, build a better foundation and that self-belief and that inner drive that I was able to use for years after that.
Or even just the consistency of having 3 meals every day.
Exactly. And not having to fight for survival every single moment of your life. And just understanding that, yes, that might not be the perfect family type environment, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's as if you were thrown into a melting pot of people of very different experiences. Some kids were dropped off at the orphanage literally on the footsteps when they were newborn. Others were brought in at 15 or 16 years old. Some came in who were 5 or 6, and in my case, it was 9. And then in addition to that, every single story was so complex for how they got there. And so you never knew what the battles each one of the orphans was facing, how much they were able to process, how much they were able to understand. So there were a lot of challenges that I lived with in that moment. But what made the difference was the questions that I started to ask years after the orphanage about that experience. And that is, what is my experience with it? How do I want to view that particular time and place? What are the lessons and takeaways that I learned through those challenging times?
Now, were you one of the older kids in the orphanage?
I was not. I was probably in the middle of the pack. Okay. There were kids who were 15, 16, or even 18 years old.
And did you start to get curious about other people's stories while you were in there?
That's an interesting question, because I would say to begin with, maybe not. And maybe I did to a degree. But for me, as far as who I was during that particular time, I was always someone who genuinely cared for another person. I think if there was a way that I could describe myself, it would be that. Mm-hmm. I genuinely cared for other people. I genuinely cared and wanted to create a space for them to process, to heal, to hear themselves, to better understand who they are. I didn't have the tools nor the knowledge to help create any sort of platform or space for people to constructively use those past experiences and turn it into something else. So if there was anything when it comes to getting curious about people's stories, I was just genuinely curious about them and what they went through. Now, I didn't have a level of self-awareness, I will say that, to ask them some of those deeper questions that I'm able to ask now. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think it's a developed skill. I think self-awareness, in my opinion, I don't think it happens overnight, and I don't think you wake up with it.
Mm-mm.
I think you have to learn it, and you cultivate it through different relationships and connections that come into your life. And so it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I started to develop that skill and use it in a way to help others better understand their own journeys.
Mm. All right. So now talk to me about, and the reason I asked that question is because obviously you've made it your mission to
Right.
help people with similar stories and help them use that in an impactful way. So I was just wondering if you were, well in there, you were already curious about people's stories, or if that's something that developed over time, like you mentioned, through some of your own self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's go forward a little bit here. And at 12 is when you were adopted and
Mm-hmm.
moved halfway around the world. So tell us a little bit about that and what happened there.
Well, first things first that I'd like to point out about adoption is this. I think, in my opinion, there's a misunderstanding of what international adoption actually means. What I've learned is that oftentimes adoption is viewed as that final step, when in reality, it's the first step to a completely new journey. When I came to the States, I didn't speak English.
Mm.
I knew very little about this part of the world. And the things that I did know were not enough to even have a conversation or even form a sentence. So there are a lot of challenges that I was presented with. Another challenge that I'll share with you is this. Coming into the States as a 12-year-old kid and being put in the middle of 6th grade, what I've learned about the educational system here in the States is that whatever grade you're actually in, you're not actually in that grade. You're 2 or 3 grades above that. That's what you're aspiring to be. So when I was in 6th grade, we were preparing for 8th grade. When I was a freshman in high school, you're already starting to have conversations about college. When you get into college, the question becomes, who do you want to be? What do you want to do in life? So everything is accelerated. For me, it was accelerated even more, because here I was being put in the middle of 6th grade with the task of learning everything that a 6th grader needed to know, in addition to learn English, understand how to make friends. Imagine being put in a position where you don't know how to communicate with people around you. How do you make that friend?
Which is already challenging enough at that
Exactly.
age. At 12 years old, has its own, just being a 12-year-old, has enough challenges of its own, but then to layer in being new to this country, not being able to speak English, and all of those other things. How did you navigate through some of those challenges and stay determined to, break through some of those challenges?
I think for me, what helped was a couple things. First, having a supportive family. I truly am grateful for my parents. And the biggest reason why is because as long as I can remember, they chose to create a space for me to live out my story, make my own mistakes, but also create enough of a feeling and a support network that they're always there, every step of the way. And so during those 2 to 3 years, one other challenge I'll mention is because I wasn't able to communicate with them in English, we had to use a paper dictionary. This was during a time when Google Translate was just becoming a thing.
Mm.
So imagine that. 12-year-old kid, 12-year-old boy. Boys already have a difficult time expressing their emotions. 12-year-old kid who gets frustrated because he doesn't know how to communicate in that language. Is he really going to take the time to find the proper words in that paper dictionary? Probably not. So for me, I was very fortunate to have had and still have a set of parents that just continued to believe in me. And I took them on a roller coaster when it comes to all the experiences they had to go through. But they continued to stick with me and know that, hey, we're going to find a way. They instilled enough self-belief in me that I can also do it, that I can go through the struggles, that I could find what I have to find as far as ways to overcome whatever the challenges may be. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things, in my opinion, that happens later on in life, and something that I get curious about quite a bit. And that is, why is it that it is towards the later stages of life that we begin to appreciate our parents, and not in the midst of it, not in the teenage years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Don't think I have the answer for that.
But it's something I've wondered. It's like, why does it and maybe it's because there's a certain level of maturity and understanding that takes place.
Yeah. I think that once you're on the other side of that, you start to appreciate some of those things, where you start to connect some of the dots of like, oh, that's why.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me now about your nonprofit, what you guys are doing. I know it's something you're really, passionate about, and just tell us some of those stories and some of the great things that you guys are doing.
Mm-hmm. 3 years ago, we started an organization called Overcoming Odds. And initially what it was a space for people of similar experiences to what I'd been through. And that is those who were adopted or have gone through the foster care system. And I wanted to create a space where I can highlight all sides of the story, the good, the bad, and everything in between when it comes to those experiences. Because I felt that in order for anyone else to make the best possible decision in their life, they had to see all angles of that story and how it may play out. So I wanted to create that space, and it started off as a blog post. That's all it was. And then it grew into other people sharing their stories. Mm-hmm. Then within a year, what I realized was that this message speaks to so many other groups. This message speaks to people who have overcome hardship, who are currently facing hardships, who are part of different groups such as refugees, immigrants, that might have had their own set of challenges to overcome. And that's where I chose to expand the mission to being it more about a space for people to be seen, to be heard, and to be appreciated. And how a lot of that is done is through the story. I'm a huge believer that your story, your personal narrative, is the most valuable currency there is. And the reason why I believe that is because when I look at my life and all the different things that I've been able to accomplish throughout my time, it all started with that internal story. It all started with how I positioned myself and my relationship to whatever the obstacle may be in front of me. Mm-hmm. And then once I shifted that story around and I started to look at all of these things as far as, okay, if this is a difficulty, why does it have to be difficult? Who says that it's difficult? Or this is going to take time to accomplish, or it will take a long time to accomplish. What's long? Mm-hmm. And then what I realized was that a lot of those things are a matter of perspective. But what guides, in my opinion, a lot of the action and the dreams and aspirations that I've had in my life, it's that story. It's that inner story. And that's where I chose to step into it more and help people recognize the power within their own story.
Okay.
But
yes. So
I think the power, has to be recognized through as far back as you can. You know, the trauma and the pain points and all the challenges that you've experienced at younger age or in the middle, wherever you are on your journey. That's the origin. That's where a lot of the power actually is.
Now, I'm just wondering, and I'm curious, what's been your experience in finding or being able to connect with these people, especially, and I'm making an assumption, but not all of these people probably are ready to talk about their story or have done maybe the work or are self-aware to be very open about their story. So how do you connect with these individuals, and what sort of work do you do with them to get them a little bit more open to talking and telling their story?
So the way that I would answer the question is like this. I approach people as people. So when we talk about these people, those people are also you. Those people are the listeners of the show. And so the first thing that I try and do is I try and put away the label, put away the association, put away the group, and look at you as just another human being. How it gets created, in my opinion, energy. It's creating a space where I can mutually meet you wherever you're at along your journey, not judge, but rather just accept you for where you are. The question that you asked about some people may not be ready. That's perfectly fine. Because here's the thing that I've learned over the years. Not everyone wants what you want. People have different dreams. People have different aspirations. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a space through which I can tap into my story and different elements of it. And through that journey, create a space for other people to do the same. So for anyone that's seeking that space and looking to be a part of that community, they can join. But it's not for everyone. If you think about how many of the products have been created in this space, I'm sure you've learned through your own experience of being a startup founder of multiple companies. There isn't a single product that fits all.
Right.
You even look at a bigger scale like Apple. I can name you 50 people that don't have Apple products. And so I think at the end of the day, it just boils down to really choosing to understand, why are you doing what you're doing? And what are you trying to accomplish with it? If the goal is to please everyone or to solve everyone's problem, in my opinion, if there's anything such as impossible, it's that thing. It's trying to solve everyone's problem and be the solution to everyone's problem. When in reality, I think, in my opinion, all I can ever be is a space or a facilitator for someone else to process whatever it is that they're going through.
Wow, this is amazing that you've created this space for these people, or anybody who's willing to be a part of it. And so before I let you go, and thank you so much for coming on the show today, just tell people where they can connect with you online, where they can learn more about your story or be part of the space that you've created.
The best way that people can connect with me personally is like you and I have, and that's through LinkedIn. And then beyond that, for anything related to the organization or any of the events that we're going to be hosting during this time, will probably be through our website, and that is overcomingodds.today. And then beyond that will be any other social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And for anyone that's looking to share their experiences and know that they're not alone, that there are others within the community that have walked similar paths in life, this is one of those spaces where you might be able to relate. I can't speak for you as far as the listener, the impact that it may have on you. All I can say is that others have found impact and others have found a space in a community to feel like they're not alone, to feel like there's someone else who has walked the path before them. And I think that's all we can ever do. That's all I can ever do, is to create that space and create opportunities. And then from there, you choose.
Oleg, thank you so much for coming on the show today. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, share with your friends, and we're listening for your feedback. The show is all about you.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Monster Chats, presented by Monster VoIP, where we share the tools, methods, and best practices that business leaders use to build new connections, strengthen relationships, and impact sales in organizations of all shapes and sizes. If you have any questions from today's show and want to reach us directly, please text your question to 424-378-6966.